Hello, Garland, Nixon here. We're hanging out with the one and only Caleb Maupin. He was with his organization, CPI USA. They were out in the street doing some work today to promote the Alaska Summit and to push for peace. So Caleb and I are going to review some things and talk about it. Let's talk. Hello, Garland, Nixon here with the one and only Caleb Maupin. And Caleb, are you running this on your channel also?
I am, yes. We're live
Excellent.
on my channel as well, yeah.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So, there was a lot going on. We had people saying, oh, this is it. As soon as Putin lands, they'll do him in, they'll kidnap him, they'll grab him and for the ICC, whatever the case may be, right? It's all a trap, which I didn't believe that for 1 second. It's different kinds of traps. Oh, it's a trap. They'll get them there and they'll say you have to take this deal, and if you don't, we'll throw 1 million sanctions at you. There was a lot of pessimism, and let's face it, if we're honest here, if we're intellectually honest, based on what the U.S. empire does, it's not unreasonable. It's not unreasonable to be pessimistic. However, there's nothing wrong with optimism too, and certainly with pushing for peace. With pushing for something good to happen out of this. It appears, I've been listening to this stuff, that there was some kind of an agreement made. We don't know what it is. Trump's now saying he's going to call the people in Europe. Well, we already know their position, but let's start with what's happening. Caleb, so let's talk about what you've been doing. I know you've been doing street work on this and other things. Talk about what's happening. You talk about your street work, what kind of reactions you got, etc.
Oh, well, as the meeting was taking place, we were in the streets of New York City, and we got a pretty positive reaction. There were people who actually stopped and joined the rally. There was a Republican guy who was just walking by, and he joined the rally, and he spoke up. He liked what we were saying. There were other people that stopped and appreciated what we had to say. And yeah, I mean, it was quite exciting to be out there. And look, I think today was a big step forward. Part of the reason why is, you'll remember, Trump said he'll know within the first 2 minutes if the meeting is worth it or not. And at the end of the meeting today, he said it was pretty positive. So he would have known within the first 2 minutes. The Russian president was also very, very positive about it. The second meeting is already in the works. This is a really, really big step forward. All those people that were saying that they thought, Putin was going to get killed, do they think Putin's stupid? Do they think he's stupid enough that he's going to walk himself into a situation like that? And let's remember, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, that's one of the big differences between some of the liberals and Trump, right? George Soros was instrumental in setting up the ICC. He's the one who funded it. And the USA has never signed on to it. And it's funny, I used to work for Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. He was one of the biggest critics of the ICC. He said if there had been any notion of the ICC existing, the UN would never have been created. If any country had any notion there was going to be an international criminal court, now you have to have an ICJ. Right? Countries have to be able to sue each other. If somebody, harms somebody else, you have to be able to work that through that. But the ICC, the idea of one world court with sovereignty over the whole world, we can arrest anyone, anywhere in the world if we think they committed a crime. No country would agree to that. And when George Soros set that up, it was they created the International Criminal Tribunal for Yugoslavia. Was what set the precedent for it. And that was a hoax. That was a complete pack of lies. Samantha Power made her career making war propaganda to bomb Serbia. And then with that precedent, they then created the ICC. To this day, now not counting the International Criminal Tribunal of Yugoslavia, but the actual ICC, every single person ever convicted in The Hague by the ICC has been African. Every single one. You want to talk about you want to talk about a bias. I mean, my goodness, right? Every single person convicted there is from one particular continent. I mean, that is particularly ridiculous. And that continent, they're just doing great now that the ICC locked up a bunch of people. Ever since the ICC came into existence, Africa's been going great. I mean, give me a break. So yeah, I had no fear that was going to happen. I was concerned. I mean, the behavior of the press today was reprehensible. I mean, the press was, well, my goodness. Did you see that? What did you think?
Well, I know, the press titutes, as they call them, the prostitutes, their job. We know their job. Their job is to do what their masters tell them. Is to say, go after Putin, stand up to Putin, push Putin, blah, blah, blah. They are the press, is the mouthpiece of the neocons. And more often than not now, the mouthpiece of the Democratic Party or the neocons in the Republican Party. So we know what they're going to do. Now, what I'd like to do, what I was just talking to my buddy Pedro on the phone.
Okay.
What I'd like to do, Caleb, is let's show, if you don't mind, can we go ahead and show the video? Caleb has some video of what they were doing in the street, the stuff they were holding up. And let's look at some reactions, see what people in the streets were thinking when they were doing this. All right, and let's get all the way down here so they can really see it.
That we are in extreme historic times right now. President Trump is currently in the great state of Alaska, attempting to make peace between the United States and Russia.
If what's happening today in Alaska will get us closer to peace, that's what we want. That's what we want. And when the president of Russia got off his plane, I saw American reporters shouting hostile questions. It's almost like they don't want peace. They don't want peace. It's really awful.
Have a moment of reflection that I call a prayer. Pray for peace. And as my faith is Christian faith, so I would like to do the prayer in my faith tradition.
This is our city, our beloved New York, and we say finally it's time for peace in America. Our hard-earned tax dollars should no longer be going to a foreign Eastern European country that has chosen the path of destruction in needless war.
All these killings, how Jesus feels about all these endless wars. Jesus came to save the world, to bring the peace of God to the world. Who is the father or mother who has ever remained, who would ever be happy or remain indifferent as the children are engaged in bloody wars?
President Trump wouldn't have been able to even have this meeting if Tulsi Gabbard hadn't revealed that Russiagate was a complete hoax, that there was no Russian meddling in the 2016 election, that they made that up, not just to go after President Trump, but to stop peace, to put Trump in a position where he couldn't do what he's doing today and make peace and reconciliation with Russia.
We really thank once again those two presidents, President Donald Trump and President Vladimir Putin, for initiating that peace talk. Many people may not agree with them right now, but down the road that result will manifest because killing will be stopped.
But President Trump and President Putin are discussing a tunnel connecting the United States to Russia over the Bering Sea. Think about all the jobs that would create. The Bering Sea tunnel, the Bering Strait tunnel. Thousands of Americans could be hired, thousands of Russians, and two countries that have been at odds with each other could be connected through the Bering Strait tunnel. It's a beautiful, beautiful vision.
We support peace in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Wow. And also, make world peace together.
Yes.
Amen.
Very good.
I do.
This city, I hope with God they do stop the war. Listen carefully. I know.
I hear you.
And I like what you're doing.
Bible verse is from Matthew chapter 5, verse 9. It is said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." The true children of God stand up for peace, because peace comes from God, the Heavenly Father.
We want peace with Russia. We want peace with China. We want peace with Venezuela. We want peace with Iran. We want peace with any country in the world. We are for connecting the world with trade. The road to peace is development. When countries are trading with each other and doing business, they're not going to go to war with each other.
Think of the tourism and the spots in North Korea that we can visit. The beaches, the resorts, the casinos that they are open.
All right, we will get more of that later, but let's continue on the conversation. So you're out in the street And you were saying, I see the thank you, Tulsi. I certainly imagine that is for releasing various things on Russiagate. And here's the thing about it. That is an important issue, and I'll tell you why. I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to say this to our people. One of the things that the Russiagate intelligence operation is what it was it created a background wherein the American people would reject any overtures towards Russia for peace. We were told they are invading our country technologically. They're trying to usurp our democracy. They're bad, they're evil, they're wrong, they're doing terrible things. So if Donald Trump or any other president said, I want peace, I want whatever, they had already created a background with Russiagate. And I think it was critical before they had this meeting. It was critical that they kind of lay waste to Russiagate so they can eliminate that background.
Indeed. And let's be clear. One difference I have with Fox News is the Fox News crowd is saying, well, this was just a plot against Trump. They're missing that this was a plot against Russia. This was a plot against world peace, that Trump was unable to reconcile and repair things with Russia after the Euromaidan coup that came from Obama, because he came into office being accused of being Putin's puppet, being accused of colluding with Russia, so to speak. Now, what's interesting is it was recently pointed out to me that the word collusion, there's no such crime. In the United States, there's a crime called conspiracy, but they have created such a hysteria around conspiracy theories. They decided not to call it that because people would immediately think, oh, well, that's a conspiracy theory. It's not true. So they discovered a new word, collusion, even though there's no such crime, but nothing took place. And they did an assessment. Tulsi showed it. They did an assessment before the election. Is Russia trying to help one candidate or the other? No, they're not. They did an assessment after the election. Is Russia trying to help one candidate or another? No, they're not. And Obama said, ooh, I'm looking for another answer. Can you give me another answer? And the whole idea of saying that Trump was working with Russia, that Russia was trying to rig things for Trump, it came from a Hillary Clinton campaign office. It did not come from the intelligence community. And they highlighted stuff that they knew was bunk, like the Steele dossier, and they kept it going, and millions of our tax dollars was spent. And all of this was to cast a shadow so that Trump couldn't reconcile things, so that things would escalate to the point that they are now, where there's a war going on, right? That Russiagate was an essential part of paving the way for a war. I mean, this is just like weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction. They lied about that and paved the way for the U.S. invasion of Iraq. In this case, they lied to say Russia had colluded or interfered in the U.S. elections in order to psych the American people up, to prevent anything, to de-escalate the Ukraine situation. And they lied to get us into a war. This is exactly what Bush did. And it was done by Obama. It was done by Hillary Clinton. And it was done by the intelligence agencies cooperating with the Democratic Party. And the response of the mainstream, like liberal media, Fox has talked about it. Tulsi Gabbard has talked about it. As they've just said, oh, there's nothing there. They don't have an answer. There's no debunking it. The files are there. Tulsi revealed the files. You read them, and there's more of them coming out every day. James Clapper said it was a team sport. Making this up was a team sport. I mean, it is so blatant what they did. And that all the Russia collusion, all of that is based on a lie. I will say that some of the people that didn't agree with us out in the street, they still think it's true. And I said, didn't you get the memo? Yeah.
Well, here's the problem with Russiagate. And I said this when it happened. I had my show on Pacifica in Washington, D.C. And, can you imagine a guy on Pacifica back then saying this is a load of bunk in Washington, D.C., the land of blue and yellow flags, right? So it wasn't easy, but I the whole time said it makes no sense. It's a lie, and I don't accept it. And the thing that I found, and I made this statement back then, I came to realize someone would call in and say, oh, what about the Trump Tower meeting? And I'd say, I'm pretty familiar with it. In fact, the Russian lawyer was a woman named Natalia Veselnitskaya. I interviewed her with a interpreter. I'm very familiar with that. What do you know about that? But I'm all open. Explain to me how the Trump Tower meeting shows collusion. The caller would say, Well, what about? And they go to something. I go, wait a minute. Let's start with that. I'm all ears. What I found was this, Caleb, they knew nothing. That they didn't believe that based on evidence. They believed it as an act of faith, almost as a ritual. I am a Democrat. I hate Donald Trump. Therefore, anything that I am told about Donald Trump is a werewolf. He's a vampire. He's a zombie. It must be true. He's terrible. I hate him, and I was told something bad about him. It must be true. I realized they created it. They took advantage of something. They said, you don't like Donald Trump. Well, there's a lot of reasons a person could come up with not to like Donald Trump. So they come up with something. You don't like Donald Trump. Yes. Therefore, now we have the power of suggestion. Anything that I suggest to you, you're going to believe, and you're going to repeat the talking points. You're going to know the music, but you don't know the words. Yes, it's the Trump Tower meeting. Tell me about it. Huh? Because in their circles, nobody ever said, give me the details of the Trump Tower meeting. They just said, yeah, the Trump Tower meeting. Yeah, the Trump Tower meeting. Yeah. Nobody knew what the heck they even meant when they said that, but they watched Rachel Maddow. And so we ended up with this fake, false thing where, was it Voltaire who said any belief that is not founded in logic and reason will not be swayed by it? That's where we end up. And it's, and of course, as you said, ultimately, it's to stop this. And this, to me, this is not about Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, whether he's smart or not, whether he's good or bad or whatever. It's about Nixon. A lot of the issues with Nixon, but Nixon went to China, and that was a good thing. It's not who it is, but it's that these are two nuclear superpowers, and we need to start opening the potential for peace.
I've talked a lot about false polarization, and woke versus MAGA is a false polarization. Anywhere you go in America, people know about three things that they are very positive about. One, all these wars being waged around the world, they're not benefiting us. They're not for us. They're for somebody else. They're for, some rich people. They're for, the government, the deep state, whatever. It's not for us. Two, our living standard is going down. Our life expectancy is dropping. Our roads are falling apart. Our water's not being purified. Three, our freedoms are being taken away. Our right to freedom of speech, our right to privacy is slipping away. Wherever you go, red state, blue state, rural, urban, secular, conservative, religious, whatever, people agree on that. And the MAGA team sports, MAGA versus woke, red team versus blue team, that is a way to make sure that we never unite around those issues against the very, very rich people that are taking us in that direction. The ship is going in one direction that is leading us off a cliff, and everyone can see that. And instead of getting together and getting a hold of the wheel and turning the ship around, which is what we need to do, we're too busy fighting over, are you on the red team or on the blue team? And the team sports is the death of us, because, somebody can be awful. Somebody can be a horrible, horrible person and still say true things. Hitler was a horrible mass murdering person, but, if he said the sky was blue, the sky was still blue, whether he was a good guy or not. Right. And that reality, facts, and logic. Look, my organization, we're the Center for Political Innovation. We're not on the red team or the blue team. And when we were rallying in Chicago, we had a banner of Trump and Kim shaking hands. Only peace can make America great again. We had a banner supporting Ibrahim Traore, the African leader. And many times people would walk by and they're like, I can't figure out what side they're on. Now, today, people thought we were on the MAGA team because we were supporting something Trump did. We were thanking Tulsi. But a lot of times when we're out there on the street doing our outreach, people don't know what team we're on. And a lot of times, if you really ask people to just listen to what we say, they agree with us. They agree. We need peace around the world. We need to protect our freedoms. We need a government that invests in communities and builds people up and does something about the fact that our country is falling apart internally and living standards are dropping. We need jobs and schools and education. We need paved roads. We need power plants. We don't need prisons. We don't need wars. And we certainly need to protect our freedom to protest, our freedom to disagree with the government, our freedom to not be spied on without a warrant. All of these things are important, and Americans agree about these things. And the false polarization is the way they're keeping us from seeing, getting together and saying, look, this is what we agree on. And that is what we've got to push back against, the false polarization. I will work with anyone to do good. I will work with nobody to do evil. And if you can live by that rule, great.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And I think that what we're looking at now is a very dangerous people. First of all, people have to understand the dangerous circumstance that we're in. I mean, we're in a position where the United States has literally, the neocons, the U.S. empire, started a proxy war against the only country in the world that has more nukes than we do. And we are seeing the lines crumble in Ukraine, which was inevitable. And we're coming to a point where the U.S. empire is going to have to look at its proxy war and realize that it's not just lost. It has collapsed. It is catastrophically lost. And that's coming up. And that's a dangerous situation because the neocons are going to say, we've got to act. We've got to do this. We got to throw nukes. We got to all die. And we're trying to argue for the kind of dialogue that can prevent that. I think that's what I'm saying anyway, Caleb.
Yeah, and I mean, there are certain facts that need to be acknowledged here. The one thing that needs to be pointed out is Russia won. They won the war. It's just a question of how much they won the war. I mean, at this point, they have completely demolished Ukraine. Ukraine doesn't stand a chance. The question is, are they going to march all the way in, and do they have to take Kiev, and do there have to be more and more bodies, piling up before we finally call it off, or can we call it off now? I thought it was interesting. We didn't hear the terms of what the deal was. I have heard different theories floating around, but I guess at the end of the day, I mean, Zelensky is the guy who will have to sign it, right? Trump said at the next meeting, Zelensky will be there. But I've heard many people say they picked Alaska because how did the United States acquire Alaska from Russia? They bought it. And that there's been over $350 billion of Russian money stolen since the conflict began. And that money is sitting in bank accounts frozen. And one thing that is floating around, again, can't confirm it, is that basically the USA will unfreeze that money and Russia will use that money to buy the Donbass from Ukraine. And that'll be the way this ends. Russia basically considers that money gone anyway, because they've already made up the difference with the oil prices and such. So at this point, that money's gone. So if that money that was theirs before that they're not going to get back, then gets given to Ukraine, and that's the deal. And a new border is drawn, and the Donbass are considered part of the Russian Federation. Ukraine recognizes that. The United States and the whole world recognizes that. Then we can move on, and through rebuilding, we can establish peace. And that's very important, right? That if Ukraine starts rebuilding and economically developing, Russia's right there. It's their trading partner. And if Russia is involved in the process of helping Ukraine rebuild, I thought it was really great. Putin said that, as hard as it is to believe, they consider the Ukrainian people to be brothers, to be a brother people, right? That they have the same origins, and that, look, I've been in Russia. I was in Moscow, and I saw in the Moscow subways, they have a beautiful mural that's got traditional Ukrainian dancers on it, celebrating the victory in World War II. And it's got like Soviet soldiers coming back from war and traditional Ukrainian dancers and their traditional outfit. And, when I've been going to Russia for years, there used to be right near Red Square, there was this nice traditional Ukrainian restaurant right near Red Square. And they would always take you there because that was, Ukrainian food was always really loved by people in Russia. They don't consider the Ukrainians to be their blood enemies. They're not trying to abolish Ukrainian culture. And, people get really fired up. But let's talk about this. The only reason that Ukraine as a country exists is because of the Soviet Union. Right. And no one wants to talk about this and all of that. But in the Russian Empire, there was no border separating Ukraine from the rest of the Russian Empire. It was just a region of the Russian Empire where they spoke a little bit of a different dialect. And when Lenin came to power, he was really into the right of nations to self-determinations. And he said, these people in this region, Ukrainians, you have your own dialect, you have your own region, you're a nation. And Lenin drew the first border of where Ukraine was. And Lenin then commissioned the communist government in Ukraine that was part of the Soviet Union to sit down and make a written Ukrainian language. So if it wasn't for the Soviet Union, there would never have been a border for Ukraine. There would never have been a written Ukrainian language. It was all just the Russian Empire until then. So the entire notion of a Ukrainian nation comes from something the Ukrainian nationalists all hate, which is the Soviet Union. And then Stalin expanded the border of Ukraine. And then Khrushchev added Crimea to Ukraine. And that's why when this war began, you'll remember Putin said, they talk about decommunization, right? They're trying to get rid of communism in Ukraine. It's like, you really want to decommunize? Without the communists, there would be no Ukraine. And no one wants to point that out, right? There's this narrative that, the Soviet Union was just so determined to destroy everything Ukrainian. No, the Soviet Union went out of its way to create everything Ukrainian. Even up to this day, most of the people in what was considered Ukraine before the war began speak Russian in their households. But the Soviet government required that the written Ukrainian language and the spoken Ukrainian language be taught in schools to all children in order to promote it. I mean, this narrative about cultural genocide and all this, that's just not the reality. And let me add also that, there was a horrendous famine in Ukraine in the early 30s. No one disputes that. But that famine wasn't just in Ukraine. It was in Moldova. It was in Russia. It was all over the country as they were trying to get their agricultural system together. And the regions that were the hardest hit by that famine are the regions that actually have joined with Russia, are the new republics. So, where there's, support for Russia. So this idea that there was some, Russian plot to exterminate Ukrainians or something, that just didn't happen. That's something that we're taught in school. It's a narrative that began with Hitler. It was Hitler who originated that narrative to recruit, Ukrainians to fight against the Soviet Union, and it got inserted into, anti-communist propaganda in Western countries. And then after World War II, it was an anti-Soviet talking point, and we've just kind of accepted it. And a lot of historians look into this and they say that's just not what happened. You can criticize the Soviet Union for violating human rights. You can criticize all kinds of things. But, Stalin built the world's largest power plant at the time, the Dnieper Dam in Ukraine, right? Stalin electrified Ukraine. Stalin wiped out illiteracy in Ukraine. This idea that Ukraine has been, suffering at the hands of Russia for generations on end, that's not true.
Well, and let me just say this: we're speculating. Somebody's like, a couple of people were like, "Well, no, Caleb's making stuff up. Russia didn't. They're not going to buy." People are speculating right now. We don't have any final. When people talk in alternative media, we often speculate. So if we speculate and say maybe it's this or maybe it's that, don't go run off. Caleb said this, Garland said that. They're wrong. We're speculating. We're trying to figure this thing out. Nothing's come out. We know that according to President Putin, it sounds like some kind of a deal was made. According to Trump, it sounds like he's saying, well, we didn't get this done. In other words, they didn't get. Sounds like some kind of offer. We're speculating. We don't know what it was. Maybe we'll know tomorrow. It sounds to me like until Trump calls the lunatics in Europe, that he won't know. We already know the position they're going to take, but it sounds like some offer is good. And we're speculating about the offer. So let's not get carried away in the chat. Okay. We're speculating. We're having a conversation here, trying to figure this thing out the same as you are. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. I think that the other thing is the fact that the Russians came, they were extremely professional. They came and, they weren't, a bunch of evil demons with flaming swords attacking and, the vicious Russian hordes, that they were guys in business suits who were professional coming to, and they were having a press conference. And we've had this craziness built up from Hollywood. If you ever notice, in Hollywood, Russia is always the Russian mafia. Like you watch something, I don't know how many movies, and when you get to the mafia, the Russian mafia, and there's like some guy and he's all sweaty and he needs a shave and he talks like, Wes, we must get the money, but first we will kill you and your son. He's saying stuff like that, right? So we got Hollywood giving us this caricature of Russians. We got the Democrats and neocons, whoever, giving us this caricature. What we're getting is caricatures of some evil group of whatever, right? And then what we have is real people coming, having a professional meeting, a diplomatic meeting. I think it's positive. And I think it gives those of us who are A, pushing peace, and B, arguing, don't believe the propaganda about the Russians. I think it gives us something to, or helps us and gives us something to work with also.
Yeah, well, I mean, the day wasn't without some snafus. Now, I know I've seen that a lot of the Russian journalists are very mad about the conditions, that they were not, in a good place. They were like put up in like a army barracks or something like that. And, and that I guess it was really hard to get hotel space because this is the height of tourist season in Alaska. And this was not anticipated. This was very last minute. And then also, I think it's certainly not an accident that the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, wore his Soviet Union T-shirt.
That was great, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was great. So, it's
what do you think that was about? Just again, hey, everybody in the chat, don't get carried away. We are speculating. We do that sometimes. It's kind of fun. Okay. So Garland and they said he did it because he was a cop. I don't know. But what are your thoughts on that? I found as soon as I thought, I think I'm going to try to pick it. That was interesting. That he brought the legacy of the Soviet Union with him.
Right. And then also after the meeting, Russian President Putin went and laid flowers on the graves of all the Soviet pilots who gave their lives fighting Japan in Alaska, right? And we don't know about that, but there were Soviet fighters on planes in Alaska who went and fought Japan. And Victory Over Japan Day is coming up, right? And Xi Jinping wants Trump there. Putin invited Trump to the Victory in Europe Day celebration, the Victory Day celebration that happened back in May. And he wasn't able to go. But now Tulsi Gabbard has released all this information. And I think now Trump can go. I think he should go to Xi Jinping's Victory Over Japan celebration. I think that would be a really great thing if he did that. And Putin will be there. Kim Jong-un, somebody else he likes, will be there. It'll be great. And Kim Jong-un was just in Russia, I believe. They were commemorating the liberation of the northern half of the Korean Peninsula by Soviet troops. And Xi Jinping is going to have the big celebration for the victory over Japan. And China's driving out of the victory of what they call, I think, the anti-Japanese war of resistance is what they call it. So this is an important moment. And, the other thing is that they said they weren't only talking about Ukraine. That was the other thing. They said that they were talking about economics, etc. The Bering Sea Tunnel, the Bering Sea Bridge, the Bering Sea Tunnel, that's been in the works for a long time. There's been a lot of talk of that for a long time. And I have a feeling that was on the agenda. And it's a weird pattern with the Trump administration that, I've talked a lot about the division among the American elite, the Yankee and cowboy war, the New England old money, the Rockefellers versus the military industrial complex, the fracking cowboys, the Texas billionaires, the California nouveau riche, all that, right? That's an old time divide in American politics. Carl Oglesby wrote his book about the Kennedy assassination and the impeachment of Nixon, the Yankee and cowboy war. Well, it's interesting that Trump has raised this idea of Canada joining the United States, right? And in the western parts of Canada, right, where you had the trucker convoys, I think Alberta is about to have a referendum about joining the United States. Alaska obviously is not connected to the rest of the United States. You got a bunch of Canada in between. But the Arctic is really, really important. And the Arctic was definitely on the agenda. The Arctic is full of natural gas and it's full of minerals. And Western Canada is also full of natural gas and full of minerals. And Alaska is already the United States and it's up there. And I think developing that region and maybe trying to figure out a way they could have a corridor connecting Alaska to the continental United States and then a Bering Sea bridge connecting Alaska to Russia. I feel like that is that Western faction, the cowboys, if you will, that are not in with the New England, London Yankee establishment. I think they want to pivot the centers of economic power in the United States to the West. And doing that is developing Alaska, increasing the amount of wealth in Alaska, and the Bering Sea Bridge, the Bering Strait tunnel connecting to Russia. I think that that's part of this, and that divide among the American elite, where the more conservative forces are the cowboys that are located in the West, and the more liberal forces are the New England old money, the New York Council on Foreign Relations, the Rockefellers, etc. I think you can read this into that. And the whole idea of annexing parts of Canada, the trucker convoy thing, the Bering Sea, the meeting taking place in Alaska, I think you can put it, in that category. Again, like you said before, we're kind of trying to read the shadows here. This is not, they didn't tell us and we don't really know. But the meeting went forward. I do remember that when, they had the Kim Jong-un, the last Trump Kim Jong-un meeting before the talks ended, it was immediately over. It was just, they got there. There was nothing to agree on. It was over. And Trump said, I'll know within the first 2 minutes if this is going to be productive. And it went on for a lot longer than the first 2 minutes, and they did meet and they did have progress. So I think that today is going to lead to some good things. I really do. Now it's being, the Russian security services has said that the NATO countries had a meeting and they picked Zelensky's replacement already. He's out. He's done. Right. They've picked his replacement. And that when, he outlawed that anti-corruption organization, and then they had protests all over the country, which how are you doing that in a country that's, in a war? You're allowed to have all these protests. They've outlawed all the other political parties, but then they have all these protests. Clearly somebody in the Ukrainian government wanted those protests to happen. There's big calls for Zelensky to go. And that Zelensky, he needs to play his cards pretty well, because there's a good chance he's going to be the fall guy. We know, you and I know, and people who watch these programs know, this war is going to go down in history as one of the biggest money laundering operations in history, right? They have pilfered so much money. Remember at the beginning of the war when everyone had Ukraine flags out and they were telling us all to give every last nickel to Ukraine, and people thought they were helping hungry children. They were actually helping Ukrainian oligarchs, buy yachts and buy luxury apartments in European cities. And, they're going to have to blame somebody for that. And it looks like Zelensky is going to be the guy.
Do you remember when either ABC or CBS, one of them, did this story, and it was 70% of the money that was going to Ukraine was being stolen, and within like 2 days they made him take it down? Do you remember that?
I do.
So they did. Yes, they just made him take it down. They didn't say, "Oh no," they just like pretended like it didn't happen, because the story came out. It's like 70% of the, and people were like, "What? 70% of the money gone?" That story was gone, was quickly done away with.
Yeah, and they rated Ukraine as one of the most corrupt countries in the world. The New York Times and others did. It was just understood Ukraine was a wildly corrupt country, and they scrubbed those records. They went and revised the websites to not say that. It was just particularly ridiculous. And, when this is all said and done, the facts are going to be there, and somebody's going to be held liable. And Zelensky, he needs to figure out how he can tap dance his way out of office and not in handcuffs. That's what he really needs to figure out, because they're going to want to blame somebody. I don't think Zelensky is the guy who's personally responsible. I think he was the front man, right? He was the actor. He was a paid actor, basically. However, they're going to try to make somebody the fall guy, and it's a good chance it's going to be him.
He knows too much, pal. He knows way too much for his own good. I'll put it that way, in my opinion. He knows too much for his own good. The safest place for him might be Moscow. He should be calling the FSB trying to make a deal, because that may be the only way he gets out with his hide. But at any rate, one thing that's obvious right now, and that is that I saw where Gregory Meeks was preaching. And here's what kills me. The neocons here are so intellectually bankrupt, just like the European neocons. Meeks was praying, preaching something about, yes, Trump didn't get a deal with Ukraine. Now he knows he needs to do back-breaking, bone-crushing sanctions. But the sanctions are not on them, they're on us. If he listens to these people, if Trump would listen to these people and say, okay, we're going to do 100% sanctions on China. We went through that last March. We know how that ends. It ends with empty shelves. It ends with no rare earths for Detroit or anywhere else that's building anything. It ends with a collapsed economy. So these people are so unrealistic, as bad as they're telling us Trump is. And like I said, I'm not saying Trump is the second coming of FDR by any stretch of the imagination, but he's the president now. It is what it is. You got to face the reality of that. Sadly to say, Trump's more grounded in reality. And I don't know how much grounded he is in reality, but he's far more grounded in reality. He's somewhat grounded in reality. These people are like, yes, let's do this. And you're like, but that will collapse our economy. It's almost like they're like, I'm going to say this because A, I know it's not going to happen. And B, I'm not really going to think about what would happen. I'm just going to say it needs to be done. It's insanity.
Well, it's interesting because, we talk about the neocons. Brzezinski was not a neocon. A lot of people tell you Brzezinski was a neocon. He wasn't. And when Bush made his axis of evil speech after 9/11, Zbigniew Brzezinski didn't agree with it. And his difference with the neocons was Brzezinski hated the Russians. He absolutely hated the Russians. He was Polish. He'd been raised to hate Russians or whatever. But his game was, okay, we're going to find the Taliban and we're going to make them allies against the Russians. We're going to find Eastern European far-right people and we're going to make alliances and we're going to suck up to China and turn them against. He wanted to play games. Whereas the neocons, with them, it was a moralistic thing, right? They're on a crusade to spread freedom, right? You know, they viewed the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany as equivalent, and both of them as examples of excessive democracy, which, how does that make sense? But it was basically, it's when the rabble get together and threaten the great intellectuals, you get, you know, authoritarian regimes. And so it's the duty of the United States to protect the freedom of intellectuals around the world by overthrowing these governments, creating societies where the best and brightest can rise to the top. That's what Leo Strauss and Irving Kristol believed. If you read their writings on being neocons, they were on a moral and ethical crusade. Whereas Brzezinski was saying, look, I'll align with anybody. It's a chessboard. He wrote the grand chessboard. What's interesting is the liberals are now the neocons and Trump is Brzezinski. Trump is saying, let's make a deal and let's figure out what we need to do, right? Now, he doesn't hate the Russians, but he's at least thinking strategically, right? And the liberals are just like, no, Putin bad. Even if we have to wreck our own economy, it's our moral imperative to oppose, you know, and it's like the liberals are the neocons now, you know, that are on a crusade. And Trump is trying to be strategic and he's trying to think, and really what it's about, and Scott Ritter has put this really, really well in the interviews he's been doing over there, is that Russia already has won the war, right? They're figuring out the terms of defeat. I will say I do not I do not envy Donald Trump because he's going to have to, when this war ends, he's going to have to frame it in a way as if he won. And he's good at doing that. He says, oh, I got him. You know, he's going to have to do that really hard because it won't match reality. Russia won this war. You know, Russia won this war. Ukraine, it's over. They don't have a chance, you know, and they have to negotiate an end. And Trump is going to have to frame this as some kind of epic victory where he stood up to Putin or something like that. And I mean, that's what Trump has to do for American politics, but that's not the reality. Russia won. Russia won overwhelmingly.
Yeah. And so what we're dealing with now is, you know, Caleb and I are anti-imperialist people, and we're opposed to empire. No question about it. We push back against empire. We stand against empire. That being said, you have to be realistic about, I'll put it like this. You got to be alive today to be anti-imperialist. You know what I mean? You can't pretend that there are not real consequences today. You know, if you're like, okay, we're here, when does the revolution start? Great, when does the revolution start? But you got to be alive to have a revolution. So when we see, for instance, the Kamala Harris, no Trump fan. If you ask Garland, hey, it's Kamala Harris or Trump, I'd have to take Trump. I mean, that's a reality. Not that I want either one of them. Who do I want? I voted for the ghost of Hugo Chavez. You know, that's who I voted for. But my point being, here's a reality. We're in a situation, a critical situation where this thing could go nuclear. And I think we have to push and say, in the long run, we're pushing for a system that gives everyone the opportunity and that looks out for the masses. In the short run, we got to hold this thing together enough to get to that system. You know, people want to pretend like you have to just ignore that. Who cares? Trump, they're all the same. Well, they're a lot the same, but they're not exactly the same. And a little bit difference could be enough. And again, Trump, look, even now they're doing that thing in Azerbaijan, which I don't think, to be quite frank, I don't think they'll get it through the Armenian parliament. They may. So they're, you know, harassing the back of us. So they're doing all kinds of diabolical deeds that we obviously oppose. But in the short run, we have to do what we can to try to keep things as peaceful as possible so that the situation is manageable. You know what I mean? You have to manage the situation that you have in order to work towards the situation that you want.
Yeah. Well, I wrote this book a couple of years ago. It's now available in Chinese. It's hitting the Chinese market. Where is America going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. In that book, I lay out, which is basically my thesis on all of this, which is that there are two economies in the world. there is the Wall Street, London, globalist, imperialist economy, right?
Finance capital.
Yeah. And that system is failing and crashing. There's a new economy in the world that came into existence as the result of anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolutions. Russia, China wouldn't be what they are if they hadn't had a communist revolution, if they hadn't seized control of their own economy and built themselves up. The Bolivarian countries of Latin America, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, the West African Union of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they're a new economy that's in the world, the Belt and Road Initiative and all of that. And these two economies are in the world, and the leaders of the, finance, capital, globalist, imperialist economy, their solution is to just declare all-out war against the alternative economy in the world. They've just got to crush it. And in order to carry that out, they've got to set up a low-wage police state here at home. And basically, those of us with the understanding that the only future our country is going to have is with the new economy, that old economy, that old imperialist way of doing things is doomed. Our understanding has to be that we need to get our Western United States and other Western countries as tied in with the new economy as we possibly can, right? We need there to be trade and connection with China, with Russia. We need that Bering Sea tunnel to be constructed. We need those sanctions to be lifted, and we need there to be joint ventures, et cetera. And that can lead to the development of an axis within American politics that wants the United States to be restructured to be part of that new economy. And that's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be a gradual process. And it's going to take time. And that, part of it is just that this new economy is not going away, that they thought after the fall of the Soviet Union, it was done. That's clearly not the case. It's getting stronger. I've been hearing that China is about to collapse my whole life. Hasn't happened yet. And that it's going to take time. But eventually there's going to be wealthy people who realize that the new economy is the way to go. There's going to be small business owners. There's going to be a lot of working class people, and that some kind of anti-monopoly coalition is going to emerge eventually. But key to setting it up is connecting us with the new economy rising around the world and emphasizing the importance of economic growth, because the mechanisms that the old order are using to stabilize the economy are Malthusian. They think growth is bad. They think degrowth is the answer. Smaller is better, reduce the population. That's what they believe. They've believed that since the 1800s. They've believed that for a long time. The only way to save their system is to reduce the population. There's too many people in the world and there's too much economic growth. And we have to push back and say, no, growth is good. Human beings are great. Human beings are the source of all wealth. It's human labor power that creates the wealth of this world, and connect ourselves with the rising economy. And gradually, as a result of conditions and the balance of forces changing, there will be a movement in this country to get us there. Trump is the very, 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 very beginning of this, in that Trump represents, to some degree, not completely, a layer of wealthy people that are just selfish. They don't care about the overall interest of imperialism. They just want to make money. And they're not part of the club. They're not elite in with the New England establishment, and they just want to make money. And so because of that, they'll make a deal with Russia. They'll make a deal with China. They'll make a deal with Venezuela or Iran if it makes them money. Now, not all of Trump's people think that way necessarily, but a lot of them do. And that, if they are able to do that, more and more of the seeds of the new economy can be planted in the United States, and that will blossom, and that will lead to another thing, and things will get into motion. But if we cut ourselves off, and if we just continue to just isolate and attack and lock down further as a country, we're not getting any closer to what needs to happen. And that is the reality. I was on a great Zoom call with Jesse Neville of the Uhuru 3 yesterday. They are about to launch a campaign to repeal the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which I think is a tremendous thing to do. And I think it has a great I think it'll pass, because that law is being used by the rich against each other. It's not just being used against revolutionaries like the Uhuru movement, great activists like Scott Ritter. They're also using it against, Biden. They used it against the Trump administration. They're using it on each other so much. And that creates an opening for people that are rich and powerful to say, well, gee, I don't want the other team to be able to throw me in jail. Eric Adams was accused of being a foreign agent of Turkey, right? And if they say, look, we don't want it to be used against us, we could see that law gotten rid of. That law has absolutely no constitutional basis. It's so vaguely written, it's not clear what acting as a foreign agent even is. and it could be used to go after anybody. You go after Walmart. You know, Walmart has stores in Brazil. So if Walmart's lobbyists talk to Congress and say, gee, you know, I don't think you should put sanctions on Brazil because we got a business there. Oh, foreign agent, Walmart didn't register, drag them all to jail. They're not going to do that. And I will say some of the debate around the FARA law that we're hearing lately is misguided. I see on the right, you know, Nick Fuentes has debated some other people about the FARA, and they seem to argue on the premise, well, FARA is good. We just need Israel to register under it. No, FARA is not good. It is unconstitutional. It is completely unconstitutional. And we've seen that it can be weaponized to say that free speech is acting as a foreign agent, and it can criminalize being a peace activist or advocating trade with other countries. We need to get rid of the FARA law. It needs to be gotten rid of. And one thing I suggested on the call is I said what we ought to do is we ought to go around to everyone who's been charged under this law and get them to sign on to it. Get an ad in the New York Times or something like that. And it's time to just get rid of the FARA law once and for all. And that will be a step toward, you know, like I said, getting us more connected with the new economy, building up the axis here in America that will understand the kind of government we need, that'll fight for working families and invest in communities. And that there are a lot of different things that we can do. I'm also really all about opposing political violence. I think political violence is one way, especially with this false polarization. That's one way to just make sure that the ruling elite get what they want, because people will be all afraid of getting shot and instability.
And
so
they start calling people terrorists. See, that's what, look what they're doing in England, that they'll do the same thing here. If somebody gets shot and they take one and they say, okay, everybody who supports whatever that person supported is now a terrorist. They understand violence. I just want to update people. Apparently, President Trump has done an interview on Fox News. And it said, let's see, the president was pleased by Putin's words that the Ukrainian crisis wouldn't have happened if he hadn't been president. Well, we know they were, you know, buttering Trump up. They were rubbing some butter on Trump. Everybody knows that. Trump stated the agreement on Ukraine now depends on Zelensky. Well, we know what he's going to say, but if they quote agreement on Ukraine, it sounds as like that the Russians made some kind of an offer. Now, we know that it was an offer that they're winning, and it was going to be an offer that reflects that. And we know that Zelensky / Mr. MI6 is going to say no, but I think it's a positive thing. And again, it demonstrates to Russia and to anyone who is for peace, and activists like us can, once we see it and look at it, we can start to advocate on behalf of this. Hey, we got something to work with here. We got an offer for peace. Let's take it. So that's good.
yes.
He said there's a fairly high probability of reaching a settlement agreement on Ukraine, just not with the Ukrainians. I had that in. He refused to specify the points of agreement and disagreement after his meeting with Putin. He said Russia possesses a large nuclear potential, and this must be taken into account. I got to say that the Biden people never said that. We're not afraid of Russia. Yeah, well, I am. I am.
Yeah.
We nothing. And let's see, European countries also need to, quote, participate a little in the Ukrainian settlement. Lastly, listen to this. The parties are beginning preparations for a meeting involving Putin and Zelensky.
Nice.
So there's things going on at least that can at least put it on hold, all of us getting fried at 3,000 degrees. I think that's what we're working on here, Caleb.
Yeah, works for me. I think it is important, if you see any positive action, to try and boost it and push it loudly. That's why we were out there saying, thank you, Tulsi Gabbard. She is the best voice within the Trump administration. She really is. The Trump administration has done a lot of things that have disgusted and disappointed me. I don't like what ICE has done, you know, violating due process rights. I don't like going after Palestine activist students. And, you know, there's plenty that we can say we're horrified and disgusted by the Trump administration doing. But meeting with Trump today and meeting with Putin today in Alaska, we're not disappointed by that. And Tulsi Gabbard paved the road for it to happen. I really think she is in a really key position. And, you know, I almost wonder, I've heard whispers that until she came out with those revelations, there were some people within the Trump camp that had given up. They said, well, you know, peace in Ukraine is just not going to happen. But then when Tulsi Gabbard came out with those revelations, that opened the door to Trump and some of his allies saying, okay, now we've got safety. We can do this.
The term I like to use is she gave him political cover to meet. Trump also said this: I can tell you the meeting was a very warm meeting. You know, he's a strong guy. He's tough as hell and all of that. But the meeting was a very warm meeting between two very important countries, and it's very good when they get along. I think we're pretty close to a deal. Now, look, Ukraine has to agree with it. There are many points we agreed on. Most of them, I would say, Trump. So a couple of big ones that we haven't gotten here yet, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I'll take made some headway. Now, this is Trump. Is he going to wake up tomorrow and say, we're going to move bone-crushing sanctions? Yes, but that means nothing because he'll wake up on Sunday and say, bone-crushing sanctions? I don't remember saying that. So we can't worry about what Trump's going to say on a given day.
Yeah.
But it looks like right now, he said the leader spoke very sincere. He thinks Putin wants to see it done. Bottom line is, I think we're better off for having this meeting. It's simply this. And I really love Sergei Lavrov walking up with that USSR shirt. I think that was great.
Yeah, it was great. Absolutely was. I think that this was a step in the right direction. And, you know, we had our New York City rally today. People are going to be in the streets in Boston tomorrow, in Chicago, in Minneapolis, in Los Angeles. People are going to be in the streets in Colorado. People are going to be in the streets in Portland. We're going to be having little rallies like that with those same signs all over the country, because the Center for Political Innovation, this is something that, you know, now we need to get our forces out there and get in the streets. It's hot. It's a hot summer. A lot of people are on vacation. A lot of people are, you know, kind of recovering and staying out of the heat. But if there's ever been a time to be out there and say, we support this, we got to do this. You know, I mean, they flew all the Ukrainians to Alaska. Did you see that? They flew them all to Alaska to stand there with, you know, with their flags and say they didn't want peace. You know, why are all those people not in Ukraine fighting? You know, I mean, you know, I don't get that, you know. You know, there you go. So we just got to be out there and we just got to say, look, we want peace to go forward. This is a great moment. And I'm hoping that one thing can lead to another and we can have peace. We can have joint ventures between American businesses and Russian businesses. We can have a tunnel over the Bering Sea. We can have joint cooperation for natural gas in the Arctic. And, you know, that's what we need. And, yeah, that's what I think it is our responsibility to advocate it. What did the Rolling Stones say? You can't always get what you want, but sometimes you can get what you need. I believe that's how the song goes. So yeah, there we go.
You know, I think another thing is this, and people don't understand this. The second largest, people talk about Russia, the second largest party in Russia. Now, Putin's party is the party, but the second largest party is the Communist Party, number one. And the Communist Party in the past has had a lot of criticisms of Vladimir Putin. However, they have adamantly supported him regarding the special military operation. You know, they were saying we should have done it long ago, but now I'm glad we did. They're volunteering by the tens of thousands. They are out there fighting. So the Communist Party is not an enemy of Vladimir Putin and his party and their group. They are a very important ally in the Soviet Union. So, I mean, in Russia. And I think in the same way that Lavrov, you know, they're going to say he was trolling us and that they really want to do the Soviet Union. But I think some of that might have been internal. I think that may have been, I'm just guessing.
Yeah, well,
he trolls, but he nods to the people. I think it's a nod. It is a troll to some, but isn't it also a nod to some people inside Russia that's supporting them?
Yeah, well, Soviet nostalgia is at an all-time high since the special military operation began. You know, Stalin, at the time that Putin first came into office, it was about 50-50. Was Stalin good or bad? Mostly positive, mostly negative. It was about 50-50. Now it's up to like 71, 75% say mostly positive. Because he defeated the Nazis, because, you know, he made them a strong industrial country. And, you know, I was embedded with the Communist Party in the 2018 elections. I was over in Russia reporting for RT. They embedded me with the campaign of, it was the first time they didn't run Zhuganov. He's been their main leader since the fall of the Soviet Union. But they ran another guy, Pavel Grudinin, who is the owner of the cooperative strawberry farm. It's called Lenin Farms. They make the strawberries of Russia, and it's like a farm cooperative that is subsidized by the Russian government. He's the guy who owns it. He's the CEO, and he's a member of the Communist Party, and he ran for president. You know, and he was He was, he was the second place runner-up to Putin. Putin won the election. He got second place. And then the Liberal Democrat Party, which is like their more conservative and authoritarian political party, they got third. And then Simchuk, who was the pro-Western, like liberal candidate, she got the fourth place. When I was embedded with the communist campaign, look, one thing that has been very clear to me is you can't understand Russia's politics in terms of our politics. It doesn't make sense, right? Here we think, it's like Trump is always calling people that are far left, oh, you're a bunch of communists, and then people who don't like Trump say, oh, he's a big fascist and all of this. It doesn't line up that way in Russia, right? Gennady Zyuganov, right, is one of the biggest critics of LGBT stuff in Russia, and he is an Orthodox Christian. Meanwhile, I just told you Stalin is wildly popular in Russia, but so is Solzhenitsyn, the guy who wrote, the Gulag Archipelago. They just built a monument to him and all of that. And, Russia has the traditional values visa. It gets a lot of publicity of like conservative people that want to go to Russia and start a family and have kids. They want to increase their population. But at the same time, the Communist Party is one of the biggest political parties. There's big monuments to Karl Marx and Lenin that have not been taken down. Lenin's still in the mausoleum, and their hammers and sickles are everywhere because that's a symbol of their national pride. And it's more complicated than you think. There's this trend of young guys they call ortho bros, right? Or young conservative men that convert to being Russian Orthodox because Trump is with Russia supposedly, and Russia is anti-liberal and anti-LGBT and all of that. And a lot of them think they can just repeat standard American anti-communism and be in line with the Russian Orthodox Church. Well, the Russian Orthodox Church condemns communism because they were heavily suppressed during the early years. But they also hail the defeat of the Nazis, and they hail Stalin for building more Russian Orthodox churches than any leader in the history of Russia ever did. And they condemn capitalism as being godless and putting money over people. And it's not that simple. It's more complicated than that. And that we can't project our politics, right? Russia is Russia. America is America, right? Russia, they've got problems over there. I don't deny that. But their problems are different than our problems. And their political spectrum is also different than our political spectrum. And we need to remember that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I definitely think you're right. And well, I don't think you're right. I know you're right because I know so many Russian people. And the more, I'll put it like this, I found that the more that I talk to the Russians that I know that are in Russia, the more I talk to them about politics, I've said this to them, the less I understand because I don't have the context. You're always trying to align it. Well, there's this party, that party, blah, blah, blah. This party, no, it's very, very nuanced. And it's very grounded in history. You have to understand the history of these parties and these groups and understand where they are today and why it makes no sense. It doesn't make sense in a current in the background of current politics. But as you were explaining, in the context of historical politics, it makes perfect sense. And some of these histories go back many hundreds and hundreds of years. Their historical context is far deeper than ours.
And also because of the Soviet Union, I've been over there and I've talked to Russians. They're a deeply intellectually engaged people, right? And, in America, our country was founded by Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, but most Americans have never read a word of Thomas Jefferson. We never read a word of George Washington. We just know George Washington had wooden teeth and we have freedom. Isn't that great? But in Russia, every kid in school read books like What Is to Be Done and The State and Revolution and Das Kapital. And that was part of what it meant to live in the Soviet Union. And they talk about how in the Soviet Union, classical music was widely promoted. Here in America, the only people that go see a Beethoven symphony are like kind of wealthier people. It's kind of this snob art thing. Over there, the symphonies were packed full of ordinary people who packed in to see them because art and culture was for the masses. And the Russian people are very, very engaged. Now, at the same time, in the Soviet Union, it was dangerous if you became too outspoken about politics, right? If you said the wrong thing, there might be issues. So they might be hesitant to stand up and say, well, I think it's this way. But at the same time, there was a deeper understanding. I was blown away. So you have the three major parties in Russia, United Russia Party, the Communist Party, and the Liberal Democrat Party. But there's a number of smaller political parties. There's like 20, 25 of them. And they all have very complicated programs. And they actually have during the elections, I've been there for 2 of their elections, they have a debate where they let every party. And these little tiny parties, there's a couple other smaller communist parties, there's some Russian nationalist parties. I mean, they have very complex ideas that they take very seriously and they put forward, and they know they're not going to win because Putin is so popular. He's like the symbol of the nation, right? They know they're not going to win, but they put forward their election manifesto as a way of saying, this is my contribution to the debate. And it's not, I think the minimum wage should go up by $2. It's they have competing plans for how to improve the nation overall, right? The Russian people are very, very intellectually engaged. And that wouldn't come across, here in America, our politics it's sound bites, it's gossip. It's, do you like the guy with the red hair? Or do you like the guy with the blue hair or the green hair? Or, whose personality do you like or whatever? It's not like that at all. And that Putin, let's be real. Why is Putin such an effective leader? Long before he ever got elected, he was in college and he wrote an academic thesis. He said, the way to fix Russia's economy is to put oil and gas at the center of the economy. And he drew from the writings of Adam Smith, and he drew from the writings of some French economists, and he pointed to this concept of what they call national champions. When a government builds up a corporation that has private investors, but it's built up by the government as like a stabilizing force for the whole economy, right? Who's ever heard of this, right? It's like capitalism is the government hands out, communism is the government all over it. But there's this concept of a national champion. The government builds a gigantic corporation that has private investors, but it's like facilitated by the government. And it uses that huge, gigantic corporation to bring wealth into the whole country and subsidize the whole economy. And he wrote a whole academic dissertation about this. And then he got elected and he did it. Yep. He did it. I mean, he said he was going to do it. Could you imagine in American politics, we had a candidate running for office who wrote an academic paper, a PhD dissertation. This is how to fix America. And he ran for office and he implemented it. The closest thing to that I've seen is Andrew Yang kind of talked like that a little bit during his election, but he didn't do it. And then he just kind of turned into a regular politician. He got boring when he ran for mayor of New York City. Now he just seems like a regular Democrat. But during his first campaign with the math hats, and he was kind of playing with being that kind of politician. I think he was looking more to maybe like Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore or Syngman Rhee of South Korea or some of the Asian tiger leaders, perhaps. But he started out kind of talking that way, but that was it. But they have a different kind of leadership. When I spoke to Russian President Putin last spring at the World Youth Festival, when I had my interaction with him, it was, I talked to him about Uhuru, but I also said, thank you for that interview with Tucker Carlson, because you showed us what statecraft is. That word statecraft, we don't hear that word, but that's a word, right? That, just like a painter learns the art of painting and a basket weaver learns the art of basket weaving, governing is a science. It is an art. It's something that you learn by doing, right? And that in the developing world and in the East, they still have this concept of like, you want your politician to be a brilliant person who has studied how to govern. You don't want them to be just a slick talker who tells funny jokes. You want them to be somebody who really knows, just like you'd want a surgeon, right? If you go into surgery, you want that guy to really know what he's doing when he operates on you.
Let me throw this. If you look at the Chinese leadership, they're physicists and engineers. You know what I mean? The Chinese leadership are basically a bunch of scientists and intellectuals.
Yeah. And it's just that governing is like a science, and that's how they see it. And that's very different than how we see it. So I think that there's things we can learn from it. So that's what I urge people to do. I'm just hoping that today was a step in the right direction. And it looks to me like it was. Both sides are talking about it like it was. They're, the Russian journalists, they have their feelings about, the things there. People are still trying to interpret the communist T-shirt, the Soviet Union T-shirt. But you know what? I think today was a step forward, and it looks like there's going to be another meeting with Zelensky. That's a really good sign. What you just read about what Trump has said, that's also a really good sign. I think things are going in a good direction, and I'm going to keep pushing for them to go in a good direction.
Let's see. I'm looking at what the Russians are saying. Huge progress. Trump told, possible continuation, restraint. So the Russians... they're very restrained. You know how they are. They're very restrained as far as what they're saying right now. I think they're laying low and letting seeing what comes out of the Trump people. They don't want to give the Europeans or the neocons anything to run with right now. They're waiting. So we'll see what comes out of the Trump camp. I think it's going to be an interesting. We already know. He's going to talk to the Europeans, and we'll hear once that we'll hear that he capitulated, and he was played like a fiddle by Putin. Here's the good thing about that: we already know that. They don't even have to tell us that. We can write those articles first. In fact, they could have just written all of the articles before. Trump was played like a fiddle. Putin took advantage of Trump. Putin, whatever, right? All of those articles are a given. I think it's going to be interesting times, and we'll get back together again next week. Brother Caleb, and discuss it, because this is just opening. We're starting to hear. I think we'll hear something next when the Europeans reject whatever it is that Trump's calling.
Right.
And again, we don't know. Trump could get up tomorrow and say, I'm angry because I didn't get. We don't know. But let's not jump every time Trump makes a statement, because he does more 180s than Annalita Baerbock. So, all right. Thanks a lot. Caleb, let everybody know where they can find all your stuff and what you got going on.
Down below, cpiusa.org, Center for Political Innovation. I also have a YouTube channel. I'm streaming. I've got books that I've written and stuff. So, yeah, check me out. Yeah. Great.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right, everybody. Thank you very much. And also, we're running this over on Caleb's channel. So, if you're over there, if you're here, make sure you go over there and subscribe, and vice versa. We thank you all very much. And make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. Again, hey, man, we're just trying to figure out what's going on. We're hoping for the best. Mainly, we're hoping for peace. And then we can all do our magic and make this a better place. Thanks a lot. We're out.